Hello everybody, welcome back to my kitchen, and today I'm going to be making some spagbol. This is kind of part of my whole meal prep or batch cook something so you've got stuff to eat for the rest of the week thing. So today, yeah, I'm going to be making some spagbol. This is kind of a recipe I made up slightly. Obviously, it's kind of an amalgamation of other things I've seen or watched or read, but it's also a spagbol recipe I've been using since I moved out, which has been like 5 years now. So I love it. Everybody I've fed it to said it's really good. And personally, I think it's better than just using regular meat spag bowl because there's a lot of veggies in there, so you get all the nutrition you need, but it also makes it lighter and nicer to eat. I'm not 100% sure how many portions this is going to make right now. I'm pretty sure it's about five, but obviously, eat as much or as little as you want. I don't really care. But I'm going to show you how to make it. And if you do make it yourself, I hope you enjoy it too. So the first thing we're going to do is prepare the vegetables, and I have swapped one of the carrots out for some courgette, but that's just because it needed using out of the fridge. Feel free to also swap any of the carrots out for any of the vegetables you need to use up. To start with the carrots, I'm just going to chop the ends off and then cut them into 2s or 3s depending how long the carrots are so that I can comfortably slice them long ways. Then I'm just going to cut the halves into batons, kind of like carrot sticks. This will make it much easier to do the next step, which is going to be chopping them into cubes. Then you're just going to want to grab a separate bowl to put the carrots and the pepper in, and courgette or any other vegetables you use in. That's because these go into the pan separate to the onions and the meat to add later. With the pepper, you can use either one of these long ones or even a bell pepper. Either way, you want to cut the top off and remove the seeds. Pro tip for when you're using a pepper like this: if you just want to cut it and make it flat, just press down hard on the surface and it'll make it much easier to cut. Then we're going to cut them into long slices so we can cut them long and short ways to make tiny cubes as well. Then put the peppers to the side in the same bowl with the carrots. If you're also using a courgette, I would recommend removing the skin just because it can go quite grainy in the sauce, so I'm just going to start by peeling mine. Like I did with the carrots, I'm just going to chop the top and the bottom off and then split it into 3 sections so I can comfortably cut long ways down the stem and then into batons and then into cubes. I'm then going to just put the courgette into the same bowl as the carrots and the peppers and put it to the side. You're going to notice a theme here as I peel this onion and then also cut it into cubes. You can do this as thick or as small as you want for all of the vegetables. I personally don't mind having a bit more texture to the spagbol mince, but if you would prefer them to be less noticeable, you can always cut them smaller. It is important to note here that the larger the slices of the vegetables are, the longer it'll probably take to cook, or at least for the carrots to get soft, so depending on how tough you want the carrots to be, keep the size of the vegetables in mind. I am then just going to put the onions straight into the pan that I'm going to be cooking the bolognese in. Now for the garlic, I'm just going to take about half of the bulb off, which ended up being about 6 cloves, but obviously do as much or as little as you'd like. Then just make sure you remove all of the skin from the garlic. For the next steps, you're going to want the garlic to be pureed, so if you don't have a puree at this point, you need to make sure you're mincing it up with a knife. Then we're going to go ahead and prep the sauce for the bolognese, so we're going to start with some minced garlic, and to the same jug I'm going to add 2 oxo cubes. If you want to avoid having to break up the oxo cube in the jug, a pro tip would be to open up the foil of the packet and then squeeze the oxo cube in the packet so that it all breaks up and just becomes a seasoning. That way you can just literally break the foil and pour it in without the need to have to break it up once it's in there. To that we're going to add some Worcestershire sauce. I didn't actually measure this, but it's probably about 15 to 20 glugs. Obviously just add as much or as little as you'd like depending on how much you enjoy it. And then we're going to add about 2 heaped tablespoons of tomato puree. Again, I don't measure any of this, you can if you want to, but I really don't think it's necessary. And then we have our dried seasonings. I'm using rosemary, basil and oregano. It's probably about 1.5 to 2 teaspoons of each, but again, I never measure any of this, just add as little or as much as you think would be appropriate. You can always add more later on in the cooking time if you feel like it needs it. I love garlic flavour, so I did actually add a tiny bit of garlic granules, but this is really not necessary. We're almost done with the sauce at this point. We're just going to add some salt and pepper. Don't put too much of the salt in at this stage because we're going to salt the onions when we fry them off, and there's also a lot of salt in oxo cubes. The last ingredient is just a teaspoon of honey. You can also just use some sugar here, but it helps to cut out the bitterness of the chopped tomatoes. To this you want to add 200 to 250 ml of boiling water. This will then dissolve the oxo cubes and make sure all of the ingredients are well mixed together. That way when we add it to the bolognese later on, there won't be any lumps or clumps. And here's what our sauce will look like. So now in our pot I've got my onions. I'm just going to add some oil and a little bit of salt so that we can begin sweating them out. You want to do this on a medium heat and just keep giving them a mix to make sure none of them stick to the bottom of the pan. After about 10 minutes they've started to go a little bit translucent, so at this stage we're going to add in our minced meat. For this recipe you will need 500 grams of minced meat. You're just going to want to put that straight into the pan, make sure you remove the parchment from the bottom and then give it a slight mash to break it up. Make sure to give it a good mix so that the mince and the onions are all incorporated. And then you're just going to want to keep occasionally stirring it so nothing sticks to the bottom of the pan until the mince turns totally brown. At this point we're going to add in both of our tins of chopped tomatoes and then just give that a really good mix. And then we're just going to pour in the sauce that we made earlier with all of the seasonings and flavour. Of course you're going to also want to mix that in. And then we're almost done. We're going to pour in the rest of the vegetables we chopped up and make sure that that's well mixed and incorporated. The last thing you're going to want to do is rinse out the tinned tomatoes and then just place that water straight back into the pan so that we can have a little bit more liquid for the boiling of the vegetables. Don't worry, this will reduce. Now leaving it on a medium to high heat, we're going to just put the lid on and leave it for 20 minutes. 20 minutes later we're going to very carefully remove the lid because a lot of steam is going to come out of this, and then we're just going to give it a mix so that nothing is sticking to the bottom. The lid is then going to go back on for another 20 minutes. At this stage you're going to want to remove some of the vegetables like the carrots and just poke them with a fork just to see how soft they're getting. For me they were not quite soft enough at this point, so I've just put the lid back on for another 15 minutes. If yours are soft enough but the liquid is not reduced, just leave the lid slightly off so some of the water can evaporate, and that way the sauce will thicken up. Finally, after about an hour the bolognese should be done. This is where you're going to want to give it a taste and see if there's anything that is missing or you could add to it. That's again totally up to you. I personally was really happy with it, but you can add or, well, you can't remove anything, but you can add something if you think it needs it. Once it started to cool down, you can start to put it into some tubs. This actually ended up making 6 portions, which I was really happy with. Again, you can have as many or as little portions as you want out of this. I think that ended up being about £2.50 per portion, which is pretty great in my opinion, and really useful for a full week of dinner. When it comes to preparing this for dinner, I would really recommend that you just reheat the bolognese in the microwave, and you want to make sure it gets up to 75 degrees to prevent any foodborne illness, and then just prepare the spaghetti separately. I plated mine up with 1 portion of spaghetti, which is about 75 grams of dried pasta. Just put the spagbol straight on top of that and then topped it with some parmesan cheese. Of course you can substitute or totally remove this if you don't like it, and then we also enjoyed this with a little bit of garlic bread. Everyone in my house really enjoyed this dinner tonight, including Len. I think it's a great dinner to make. To say that it makes around 5 portions, takes around an hour and a half to make and will last you all week. Please let me know if you made this and if you enjoyed it, and of course thank you so much for watching.